Thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation. Actually, I remember coming first time to Korea about 18 years ago with an official delegation with our late Prime Minister, and there were hardly any coffee shops at that time. So it's unbelievable what is happening in Seoul with all the number, almost every corner you can see a coffee shop. So it's a very important market. It has become an important market, and I think you can, your enthusiasm to learn more about coffee and to be our partners, let's say, as origin countries, we are very happy to be part of that. So a little bit of ideas about this presentation was actually about branding. So as George ended his presentation earlier, was what is happening with branding at origin. Not very much. So I can't say a lot about branding in origin, although I have some ideas and some directions of where we can go. So a little bit about the challenges that origin countries and producer countries have always felt in the coffee industry, is that we are dealing with the commodity market. We produce a product that is produced in many, many countries with large volumes, sometimes up, sometimes down, and that causes a lot of headaches for producing countries because each one is competing and trying to drop the price to get the business, to get their coffee to be sold to the big multinational roasting companies, for the coffees to find a home. And that cycle is a negative cycle that gets us to bring prices down. And when prices come down, quality comes down, or at least there is no incentive for the quality to be improved and achieve a higher standard. So the other issue that is a big, big challenge for our lives is the New York sea market. As you can see, the sea market today is below $1.20. That view of life from that perspective is a very, very difficult one. Because as the market dropped, which was at $2 at the beginning of the year, and now at $1.20, how can someone try to make a living in that kind of condition? So a little bit where hope comes is the fact that 15, 20 years ago, there was a convergence of the producing countries saying there must be a better way, there must be some things we can do to improve our quality and our coffee, and therefore get a better price. And there was a movement beginning mainly starting in the US and then filtering back to Europe and some Scandinavian countries and Japan and the Far East. And this was to connect with coffee in a new way. Not the old way where it's the price and of course the origin that it comes maybe from Ethiopia or from Tanzania or from or Kenya, but to connect with it in a different way. So my coffee history started with my grandfather. And I remember very well the way my grandfather sold coffee was he would buy coffees from the suppliers in the interior. They would bring coffee to Addis Ababa, the capital city, into his warehouse, and he had the trusted relationships. And they would deliver the coffee to him. And then I remember my father on the old telex machine connecting with New York, because Jimma Grade 5, which was an unwashed coffee, and the bulk of the coffee was of that quality, going from Ethiopia 40 years ago, let's say. And it was tenderable on the New York exchange, the only unwashed coffee tenderable on the New York exchange. So big volumes were going at very low prices to New York to be tendered. And the old New York coffee buying companies like Van Ekris and others, which no more existing today, were the buyers for these coffees. And so at the end of the year, they would figure out if they made a profit or a loss. They had no idea. The producer, of course, was at the mercy of those movements and those situations. But over the last 20 years, when we started shifting, let's say this conversion happened of the third wave, I think, is about 15, 20 years ago, when I remember with my brother seeing more roasters coming, a new kind of roaster, not the old big multinational coffee buyer coming in trying to buy several thousand tons, but we got a new flow of small roasters who were interested to go and visit the farms with a different look, not the same look as the big multinational buyers who just wanted to check, is the coffee there? Can I buy it at a cheap price or not? That was the mentality. But these new micro roasters or small roasters were interested in the quality, in the cup, and a completely new angle. And the price was not as important. The quality was the most important thing. So the specialty market, let's say, and the beginning of the specialty market was the hope for the origins to get better prices and move to a better way of marketing coffee. Unfortunately, still, a lot of the coffees are being sold in this way, where even in Ethiopia, we have a big percentage of the coffees being sold at prices below the New York City market. So imagine today at $1.20, we're struggling to sell our coffees at $1.20. We can't even sell it at $1.20. But for the premium washed, superior natural coffees, we're getting a much higher price, and we are getting slowly disconnected from the New York City market. So this background a little bit of where we were and the journey we're making is a little bit requires that you understand the process. So if we look at the processing options, if you remember, there's only washed and unwashed coffee. This was in a way a 0 and 1 kind of world trying to describe these two processes. But as when my brother and I, we started our washing station about 20 years ago, 21 years ago, why did we do that? We were also interested in finding a better way for the coffees, that there must be a better way to produce or to process, let's say, because our smallholder farmers produce the coffee and then delivered it to our washing station. So we were questioning, there must be a better way, and why are people talking about the old taste of Yerga Cafe, which is somehow was being lost. So in that quest of trying to understand where the coffee quality went of these very premium coffees, we went into our washing stations and tried to understand the process and started producing, or let's say processing higher quality washed coffees. In that process, we also tried to investigate what does a natural coffee mean. And as George mentioned earlier, with the right perspective and vision, is that the washed coffees over the years ended up being the superior representation of coffee. And that happened because of the risks that are involved in processing natural coffees. As you can imagine, there is the cherry with a big explosive amount of sugar inside it, and ready to be fermented and spoiled and stink and all of that. So that's where the risk of processing natural coffees came. So if you could eliminate that risk, then you could maybe create something of value. And so the journey that we went through was actually, yes, there is, and we tried it in Yerga Cafe in our washing station, and that created for us a new way of understanding processing. So if you look at the standard processing, washed coffee comes first, but really natural coffee is a different way of processing if it is done properly. And then there's pulped natural, and there is mechanical washing. And I'll show you a slide in a little bit that brings all of this into coherence. And then as we understood specialty coffee more, or let's say what makes, I don't want to use the word specialty because it's like we wanted to make a specialty coffee, but no. It's what we wanted to do is to create a superior product. And a superior product, like in any other foods or beverages, you're trying to achieve a higher standard. The intrinsic quality of that coffee, that intrinsic character of the coffee, how to bring it out. And if you do bring out the intrinsic character of the coffee in the right way, do you achieve a superior product? And the answer is yes, you do achieve a superior product if you do it the right way. So processing is one aspect of it, but processing properly ready coffees, properly ripe coffees, and not mixed coffees. And so you can see a little bit the risk of natural coffees is once the coffee is dried, the color of the cherry is black. So you cannot tell if that coffee was processed from ripe cherry or from unripe cherry. And the moment you start mixing the cherries or the different qualities of cherries, you start skewing or you start changing the character of the coffee, and you don't allow that terroir that George mentioned, that intrinsic quality of the coffee to come out. Coming back to Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee, in a way, we are blessed because as the origin of coffee, we have, you can go around the country. In the eastern part, the Harar region. In the southern part, you have the Yirga Jaffe, Sidamo regions. Let me go to the map. And you can see almost the huge area that's being covered in Ethiopia by coffee. And by the way, we now have production in the northern part. And so Ethiopia is naturally endowed to grow coffee. And that's why God chose that coffee begins there, because of the natural climate. So if you look at the types of coffees growing and the varieties, they're all based on region. And so to understand also the branding a little bit, you have to understand that most origin countries, their coffees are described by their geographical indication, where they come from. So if you go to the Ethiopian landscape, you can see the western part, the forested areas with natural forest where we believe and we know that there are thousands and thousands of natural varieties growing in those canopied forests. And then the very famous southern coffees, the Sidamo, Yirga Jaffe, Borana, Guji. In this part you have other coffees which have, each one of them have a different character and a different profile. With the standard processing of washing or natural, you do get this manifestation of the character of each of these regions. But in reality, when you process each one to the highest level, then you really are talking about completely different micro coffees, or coffees representing those microclimates and the varieties that are growing in those areas. Not necessarily single varieties, but mixed indigenous mother varieties of coffees, and in each of these areas. And even in this part here, Arsi and Bale, which nobody has heard of, coffees that, because of their low level of processing, are being mixed and sold as Jimma grade 5, for example, or Lekamti grade 5. The lower end of the quality spectrum in terms of the price and in terms of the value for the customer. But each of these coffees, if you could separate it and process it properly and pick the ripe cherries, then it would come up and talk with its own intrinsic character. So in Ethiopia, we're fortunate that we have all these varieties. The question is, have we, as a country, taken advantage of that? Have we brought out all the coffees in all their different rainbow colors to come out and be represented in the world? In a way, as the chairman of the African Fine Coffee Association, an association of 8 East African countries, and now as the African Fine Coffee Association, we also have our West African producing countries as part of this association. But West Africa is mainly Robusta growing. So we don't look so kindly on Robusta because as, let's say, connoisseurs and looking for specialty high-end coffees, we always look at it in a different, although there are people who are thinking of Robusta coffees as its own character also, and it has its own place in the coffee spectrum. So if we look at through this association, I'm realizing that the struggles and the problems that all the producing countries are facing are almost the same. Some countries are at different levels than other countries. Ethiopia, I would say, is more advanced because of being the origin, and you know the story of the coffees that, again, George mentioned earlier, where the coffee went from Ethiopia to Yemen to Europe and then back to the colonies. The British brought it back to Kenya and Uganda, which are neighbors of Ethiopia, but it went through a full circle before it got there. So the Arabica coffees represent this higher quest for what we are looking for as specialty coffee people. And so all these countries are dealing with the same kind of problems and issues in terms of getting value for the farmers. I can see very, very heavy struggles in Burundi, in Rwanda, where they have a new, let's say, economic climate. They're able to bring out some really fine coffees that in the past were not recognized. So really, each of these countries, if they had a better management of their coffee structures, better education for their farmers, then these coffees, and then the link, because without the link to you, the coffee consumer that's demanding higher quality coffees, regional coffee qualities produced at a certain level, then these coffees would not come out. So this link, very important, that the knowledge to the farmer how to produce these coffee, knowledge to the processor how to process these coffees, the exporter how to process and also package and do the right logistics to get the coffee to the other end of the world without compromising its quality very much. Again, George has mentioned Grain Pro and vacuum packaging for green coffees, which are very, very important because of when you look at top-end specialty coffees that have very elegant tastes, for example, and that taste can be ruined very easily with improper packaging, improper storage, and so on. So the whole chain is very important to maintain this kind of integrity. So with specialty coffee, over the years, as I had mentioned, we understood what it takes to get something of superior quality. So what I was trying to tell you earlier was this understanding that about 15 years ago, once we started processing, we realized how the coffees are processed. Because in our imagination, it was washed or unwashed. But in reality, it's a whole spectrum. As you can see, I tried to explain it in this way. It was a work in progress because originally, once we did these very first WCLF grade 1 naturals, and we saw the result of such a high quality, new explosive fruit, spicy taste coming out from the coffees, tastes and flavors that we had forgotten, or let's say in our lifetime we had not seen. And it all was due to the fact that processing, natural processing, which is different than washed coffee processing, would bring out. The washed coffee, as you know, you pulp the coffee, remove all that sugar through fermentation process, and you come up with that coffee bean in its rawest form. Whereas when you have a natural coffee process, you leave the coffee bean to bake and dry inside in the juices of the coffee bean, of the coffee cherry, with all its sugars and sweetness and fruitiness. And so that, you can imagine it will create a different coffee. Then it's a matter of taste. Is that taste for you or not for you? The first, when we first did our first few bags of WCLF natural, and we cupped it in our laboratory, it was, we were shocked at the result that came out. Because in Ethiopia, when you have the washing stations and the fact and the understanding that washed coffee will bring a higher value in the world market, then what the government did was it tried to encourage as much as possible of washing of the coffee. And so when the coffee is washed, you get the best, ripest cherries to go into the washing process. Then what is left over becomes the unwashed coffee. And therefore, the unwashed coffee was not representative of the highest form and the highest quality of that coffee region. And so what we did was actually we said, let's take the best of the ripe cherries and make natural coffees out of them. And that's where this explosive new taste came out. And in a way, it was, I must say, from the results and the many discussions we'd had with Peter Giuliano of Counterculture and Jeff Watts and George and many of the others who were tasting those coffees at that time. I'm talking in exactly 2001. That these new flavors that were not accustomed, that the consumer was not accustomed to taste as part of the coffee experience, were actually a fuel for the specialty coffee market in the US and other countries to really be excited, and that convergence that I told you about, where we were trying to do something special and get higher value and so on, and where the small roasters, or let's say roasters who are interested, the third wave roasters who are interested in a new way, where we converged and were excited, let's say, about these possibilities. And so if you look at this coffee process continuum, you have the natural would be one extreme end of the process, and the fully washed fermented would be on the other extreme end. And therefore, naturally, a pulped natural will be right in the middle. So then, as a processor, you would say, okay, how do I want to process? What other variations do I want to make of the process? And therefore, if you extend this arrow to the right, you can go to the fully fermented washed, or you can adjust the fermentation and come up with new flavors, new results in the process. There's even now what is called a mechanical washing or mechanical mucilage remover, which means it won't have any fermentation time. And we know it's a process, it's a chemical process, which means the coffee flavor will change. Is it better or is it worse? People are usually very much close to the things that they are used to. So something that is new, that you are not used to, you a lot of times say it's not as good as what you are used to it. But in reality, I think it's a different process. And then when you come to the other side of this continuum, then you can adjust and process your coffees in different ways. And there is the Sumatran way of processing coffee, and that may fall here. Some people told me, no, that I got it wrong, it could fall here. So in a way, this is, let's say, the processing aspect of the coffee. Let me show you a few photos of typically how it's done. So we have machines that pulp the cherry. These are the fermentation tanks where the coffee is fermented to remove the mucilage. And that fermentation time will vary between 48 and 36 hours, something like that. After that mucilage is removed, then you have the actual physical washing of the coffee to remove the final pieces out of it. Then it's soaked and then dried with parchment. So washed coffee is dried with parchment. These are typical drying beds, African beds, raised beds, they're called. So this is the first, when we did the first experiments of supernatural coffees, this is how we did it. We made sure that the cherries were dried on single layers, so there was no chance of fermentation or of mold happening. And on the drying beds, very juicy looking cherries, which ended up like this. So if we hadn't started with this, we wouldn't know, once it's at this level dried, whether it was the right cherry. Only the cup taste would tell you that you did something right. And one thing we were very careful about was to keep moving the coffee so it doesn't, until the cherry hardens, and then it becomes self-protective. So this kind of work 15 years ago was almost blasphemous because washed coffee was better than natural coffee. And some people even said, how could we ruin the coffee with this process? But in the end, the result was something different. So once we see this process, then we should be ready to talk about the branding. So our countries, origin-producing countries, are always in this struggle. Our poor farmer is not getting his due share of the coffee market. The moment the coffee goes across the sea to the other side, its value increases by times 5, times 10, times 20, times 100. And the farmer is struggling to live at the $1 level of income per pound, which hardly sometimes cover the production costs. So when you look at roasting, automatically you have a jump of times 10 maybe in the selling price. And yes, origin countries do say maybe that is the way out for our farmer or for our countries as producing countries to create the value that we need from the product that originated with us, but then goes and the bigger share of the income from that multi-billion-dollar industry stays on the other side. It never comes back. And it brings us to the arguments of fair trade coffees. So fair trade coffee, it's very unfortunate for me because it's a product based on feeling sorry for someone else. It's a product based to say, you know what, we're making money on this side on the roasting of the coffee, but the farmer is not getting enough, so let's make sure that he gets a minimum price. This kind of argument, it has been happening for the last hundreds of years, let's say. In coffee, of course, decades. But is that the solution for the poor farmer in producing countries? So when we think of branding and how the coffee is sold, it's that, as you have seen it, it's a coffee from Kenya, it's a AA, and that's where it stops. So Kenya is branded, let's say, or Ethiopia, it's an Ethiopian Yirga Jaffe, or Ethiopian Sidamo, or Ethiopian Jimma. So Ethiopia is sort of branded, but not to the full extent. The region is representing the coffee. But then nobody else has a physical connection to that brand value. When you look at the different roasting companies and multinationals, they're all branded. Their coffee company comes first. Nobody says this is a German coffee roaster. No. It's only when it comes to producers that we talk about that it's a Tanzanian coffee, for example. But in the Western aspect, it's the company. So the company is branded first, and they make sure that the brand is protected and it looks beautiful and all of that. And then the products under the brand with very powerful lawyers making sure that nobody infringes on that brand or copies the brand. So this kind of work has to be done to get these very high brand values. Very famous ones like Nestlé's brands. Look at it, not only in coffee, but all kinds of chocolates and foods branded in such a, probably their highest bill is not the product itself, but it's the lawyers protecting the brands. You have the Starbucks brand and all the sub-brands that they do and so on. Lavazza, Ili, Nespresso, Dalmar, every company has a brand. And it's branding its products under its mother brand of the company. So as producers, what should we be doing? Origin branding, beyond the fact that we have a geographical indication that this coffee came from this region and there is this village near that area that the farmers produce very nice coffee. But how does that farmer own the brand? Should he own the brand? Can he own the brand? Who protects his brand if he did own it? When you look at these descriptions of coffee, that the coffee comes from a certain location and a certain region, maybe you can connect a farmer group, a cooperative. to that region, let's say. But beyond that, really not much has happened. If we did brand it, however, how would it be done? How would we brand it? Who would own the brand, let's say, of a region? And if there's 10,000 tons being produced in that region, are those 10,000 tons the same? Or are there different levels or different microclimate? If there are, do we now need a brand for every microclimate within that region? Or is one brand sufficient? For example, Harar or Sidamo or Yirgajafi. And by the way, a few years ago, exactly this kind of thinking process was going through our government minds. And they said, enough is enough. We have to start branding our coffees. We have to own our brand. Sidamo is a very famous brand, or Yirgajafe is a very famous brand. We have to own it. We are going to now go and register it. So the moment this happened, the backlash, there was a lot of resistance from buying regions, let's say buying companies, that said, but a producing country should not own a brand. A brand is only belonging to a company. So how does a producing country own this brand, or should it own this brand? But Ethiopia went ahead and branded Harar, Sidamo, and Yirgajafe. And actually, we found in certain countries that these brands were already owned by companies. Our regional coffees, the brands were owned by a company in some countries. So being a government, it went and said, we would like you to give back our name. This name, Sidamo, represents 500,000 farmers or 1 million farmers, and you have no right to own it. Of course, in the West, it doesn't work like that. If someone takes your name and he registers it, it belongs to him. It doesn't belong to you. So these are the aspects of branding that we are very early on in our thinking. So a lot of difficulty. But finally, I think we have registered Yirgajafe, Sidamo, and Harar. We have 2 pending lawsuits on 2 of the names in 2 countries with particular large coffee multinational companies that already registered those brands and didn't want to give it back to Ethiopia. So we're going through that process. But again, so once we get the name Sidamo, what do we do with it? We've got the brand, okay. So how do we get the value out of it? So this is a real question that we don't know what the answer is. So the government said, okay, when we do brand this coffee, these coffees, we will create a licensing system. So any buyer who buys this coffee, Sidamo, will be obliged to the Ethiopian government to sign the license agreement. No payment. You don't have to pay anything, no. But you will be obliged to protect that brand, to give it the value that it needs. For example, if you buy a coffee Sidamo, you can't buy some low-quality coffee, mix it, and call it Sidamo. You have to call Sidamo, Sidamo, or Yirgajafe, or Harar, which seems to be a fair request. But how do you go and police all these thousands and thousands of coffee companies that they are doing this or not doing that? It becomes a bit difficult. So the resistance is there, again, because people don't see, they are not accustomed to a country saying, I own this brand, it's my brand. Juan Valdez in Colombia, I think, is the one way that the Colombian government tried to create a brand for its coffee that represented it, that it could put on CNN and people would think of. And that's a good brand. Many people think that Arabica coffee originated in Colombia because of Juan Valdez, when in reality it was in Ethiopia. So as a country, we have to brand our country, let's say, for what it has and the values that it has and the coffees that it has. And beyond that, how do we get the value becomes the question. So my company, my family company, as we started producing some of these very, very high top-end coffees that won us prizes and got us in Roast magazine, one of the highest rated coffees 15 years ago was our Misty Valley coffee, which we had branded. So why did we think of branding this coffee and giving it a name other than the region which it represents, which is Yirga Jaffe? Because we as a company realized that if I call it Yirga Jaffe and I create this really high quality coffee, actually I'm creating it for the whole of Yirga Jaffe. And I don't get a personal benefit as a company from my work creating that very particular, very high-end coffee. So in a way, our idea was if we created a brand for that very particular process that we used to create this very fine coffee from the region of Yirga Jaffe in Ethiopia, then we would get that brand value that we would create it. And over the years, we have created more brands, like what you see here. These are brands owned by my company, Mokamba, Sahama, Misty Valley, and others. These were intellectual results of certain coffees that we blended and brought a certain taste. Or the second one is from one of the farms we have in Kaffa. So it's really, we own the production of that coffee from that micro region within Kaffa. If I called it the same coffee from my farm, which is in Kaffa, and by the way, there is 10,000 tons from that region, and mine is only 50 tons or 100 tons, but I processed it in a very particular high-end way, and therefore got the right result that we want, that character of the coffee to come out in the right way, then I deserve to have a brand of that coffee so I can differentiate it from other coffees. So having gone through this, I'm thinking then maybe the brands should be done by an enlightened producer, and therefore, if we want all our producers to own brands, we should enlighten them all to get to a certain level of processing and quality, and then each one. So then in that case, Ethiopia would have 5,000 or 10,000 different brands. That's a possibility. Is that the right thing? And the question that always in my mind, if we do have a brand, I think, again, George mentioned it earlier, is when people say that they want my Misty Valley or my Mokamba, if people ask for that, then am I empowered or the person buying it from me is empowered? If the consumer says, we like this coffee, who gets empowered? Or my empowerment actually means that the importer who brings my coffee to Korea or to the US also will be empowered because I'm demanding and getting a better price because of that quality. And then the roaster would also demand a higher price when he sells my Mokamba coffee. I remember and I respect counterculture for 10 years ago when our Misty Valley was selling. Peter Giuliano had bought some Misty Valley from me. And exactly what Brett said earlier, they had the different coffee brands, and one of them was the Misty Valley. And on the back, it had that this coffee came from Bagersh in Ethiopia and was produced in this way, etc., etc. So he got value out of it, and I got value out of it because I got the price that I felt I deserved for that branded coffee. And he presented it to his customers in that way. And actually, I remember at this SCAA 7-8 years ago, when I was standing with Peter at the stand of counterculture, and people were coming in, and Peter was telling them, this is the producer of this coffee. So people would stand beside me and say, could I have an autograph of the coffee bag that you produce the coffee? So this relationship, this link of me branding and then going to the next step, all the way to the consumer, is a chain of value, I think. And so, although I put here, do the brands empower the producer and disadvantage the buyer? No, I think it's a value that goes and builds all the way to the consumer. the way we are used to people buying, or let's say the buyers are used to buy from us, is today the New York C is at $1.20. For this wash Sidamo, I'm willing to pay you a premium of 50 cents above the C. So 170 is the most I can spend, because Kenya is selling its Kenya ABFAQ, which the buyer equates as somewhere in value as a Sidamo, is selling for plus 45. So the most I can pay you is plus 50. This is the kind of way, or that our Jimma 5 is selling at, they want to buy it at 20 under New York C, because Brazilian Santos is selling at 25 under the sea. This is the way these companies have been accustomed to buying. And will it be of value for them that now these coffees, all of them get branded, and all of us on these coffees will get much higher in price? Probably not, because they have created the brand in their blends that are already branded. So for them, their value is that the raw material is bought at the lowest price possible, because the brand value is obtained in the final product that's roasted, that's blended, that nobody knows what it's made of. Most of these big multinationals have baskets which they buy. The moment a certain coffee is below a certain, above a certain price, then the basket switches automatically to a different country's coffee at that price or lower price, and it would fit in the blend. It's not fair to say that they should pay a very high price if the quality is not right. So it means also that we, as producing countries, should raise our quality so that we can demand a higher price, and so that slowly we would get those cheap coffees out of the market. If we do, then those companies will be forced to go to the higher level of quality. It's a very long journey, because we're talking about huge percentage of the world's coffee being sold at this level. So at the end, the benefit is mutual, I think, for us at Origin to brand our coffees. And again, the question I had was, where would the branding be? Would you say, we have to start top level. Ethiopia has to be branded. In my case, my country, Ethiopia, has to be branded. Ethiopia has to have its own mother coffee brands. And then under it would be sub-brands for cooperatives or producers or commercial farmers or exporters like myself and producers. So it's a journey for us to get it, but I think the brand, we have to have the understanding as producers of the kind of very strong protection of that brand. So we should not only protect the brand for our benefit, but protect the brand for the benefit of the coffee. Because if we get the quality consistent to a very high level, then it's only legal paperwork to protect your rights over that coffee. But you cannot say, I have a great brand, but the quality is not up to that standard. So with that protection of the brand, then it would work for us in Origin to brand our coffees. And hopefully we would have the right partners along the chain to take that brand value all the way to the end, to the final consumer. I think with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, for your expertise and insights. Well, it is Q&A time, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I think we have, maybe where 2 questions are available at this moment.
Okay. 한국말로 질문할게요. 네, 강의 잘 들었습니다. 저희는 한국은 커피에 대한 소비 국가인데.
잠시만요.
예.
죄송합니다. 동시 통역기를 착용하시고 진행하도록 하겠습니다. Please wear the receivers
Thank you.
for the translation. And section 2. Yes, right. 네.
한국은 커피를 소비하는 국가인데 저희들 나라 소비국가의 관점에서 봤을 때 오리진이 브랜딩이 됐을 때에는 그 오리진에 대한 신뢰성이나 투명성이 중요하다고 생각하거든요. 그래서 제가 과테말라 갔을 때 예를 들어서 과테말라 갔는데 과테말라 안티구아 지역의 농장에 견학을 갔었는데 그 농장 주는 안티구아가 생산할 수 있는 양보다 훨씬 더 많은 양이 밖의 세상에 안티구아라는 이름으로 판매가 되고 있다고 하고요. 그다음에 실질적으로 이디도 미스트밸리를 내가 몇 년 전에 먹었는데 너무 맛있어가지고 감동을 해가지고 그 다음 전도에 들어온 미스트밸리를 구매를 하려고 했었거든요. 근데 실질적으로 퀄리티가 많이 떨어진 게 온 경우가 있었어요. 그래서 만약에 오리진이 브랜딩이 된다라면 우리가 그 브랜딩에 대해서 믿을 수 있는 신뢰성을 어떻게 컨트롤 하실지가 궁금해요. 그러니까 정확하게 그걸 딜링하는 업체들을 투명하게 공개를 해주시든지 아니면 딜러들을 아니면 생산량을 공개를 하시든지 그렇지 않고는 소비국가에서는 그 오리진의 브랜딩을 했을 경우에는 믿기가 되게 어려운 거예요. 이게 진짜 그 지역에서 왔는지. 왜 그러냐면 소비국가에서는 한번 유명해지기 시작하면 누군가 그게 오리지널티에 대해서 상당히 뭐라고 해야 하나 이익을 남겨먹으려고 좀 장난을 치지 않을까 그런 경우도 많이 예를 들은 적이 있어가지고요. 그래서 그런 관점에서 어떻게 접근할 수 있을까요?
I think that's an excellent question because it comes to the exact issue that we are talking about. Misty Valley, I can tell you firsthand what the problem is. The problem is Misty Valley belongs to my company. But because it became a famous name, other companies are using Misty Valley without my permission. So I can guarantee to you that the Misty Valley you bought was not from Bagersh. I can guarantee it because I did not sell Misty Valley to the Korean market in the last 2 years. So in a way, that is a bit my failure because I should come also bring my lawyers to protect my brand here in Korea and other countries to make sure nobody is selling Misty Valley in this market without, because then I could take responsibility. You could come to me and say, your Misty Valley is wrong, fix it next year or whatever. We can talk about it. But in this case, again, the failure of branding is when I own a brand, but if I haven't protected it properly and somebody else uses my brand, then it could be a very big challenge. The issue of how do origin countries protect the brand, you could hear this issue also in Jamaica, where the coffee is extremely expensive, very limited in volume, and everyone wants to make Jamaican coffee because, or sell as Jamaican coffee, even if there is not enough volume, like what you said in Antigua. So this is the challenge. I will give you an example of one green coffee supplier in Saudi Arabia. He's an old buyer of Harar coffee in Saudi Arabia. And therefore, what he did was he understood that he had a brand. He was selling Harar under his name brand, Harar of company XYZ. To protect that brand, what he did was he would go back to the marketplace and buy the empty bags so that nobody else uses his bags with his name with this inferior coffee in it. And also Jamaica has done with new laws that there is a new certificate that comes out with certificate of authenticity from the government of Jamaica. So these things are the things that we have to, as origin, we have to protect. Otherwise, if I don't protect my Misty Valley brand and somebody else uses with an inferior quality, I am losing on that brand. So it's a good question. I think it's a journey we have to go through, but also from the consuming side, you have to understand and investigate. When you buy Misty Valley, who does Misty Valley belong to? Or the Sumatran coffee that you buy, or the Jamaican coffee? Are you buying from the source? Don't assume that just because the name is on it, that it's authentic. You have to do your homework, get to know who your supplier is.
Thank you very much. Good question and answer indeed. Any other question? I think just one question is available this moment. All right, that's enough, I think. Thank you so much. Once again, please give him a round of applause for his hard work and presentation. Thank you so much, Chairman.